Reddit by Reddit and chill. Parents who adopted a child and then regretted it. What's your story? A neighbor lost her only child in a car accident when child was 17. Adopted a 6-year-old girl, Greta, from a foreign country a few years later when neighbor was 50. Greta had some emotional and behavioral problems which later turned into psychological problems. Neighbor tried various therapists, doctors, drugs, etc. Greta ended up running away the first time at 14. And again a few months later. Her main excuse was that she was trying to get back to the family that neighbor stole her from. Greta really loved using that as a reason to torture neighbor. Greta disappeared at 16 for over a year and then neighbor is getting a phone call from a hospital 5 states away. Full stop. Greta had given birth and 7 hours later walked out without the baby but did leave neighbor's name and contact info. So neighbor is 67 and raising an infant. Greta comes back a year later and basically blackmails neighbor. Give her money or she'll steal the baby like neighbor stole Greta. Greta then disappears for a couple of years only to leave another baby in another hospital. Both babies were born addicted to drugs as a special added touch. So neighbor is now in her 80s and is raising 2 kids who have behavioral and emotional issues. That's some ducked up shit. The fact that Greta leaves behind your neighbor's contact info and just throws the responsibility to her is terrible. I'm the adoptee. My adoptive mom had some kidney problems that prevented her from carrying a child. Or so she thought. She was told later that she could have. She told me that had she known then what she knows now that she wouldn't have adopted me and would have had her own children instead. I was about 12 at the time and it was devastating. Wow, that really sucks. I hope everything going okay for you after that. I'm an adoptee from the 50s. I was taken in by a foster family who abused me starting in infancy. Physically, verbally, emotionally and sexually. Both of them. They only adopted me when the state of Mississippi told them that if they did, the abuse would be considered discipline. If they didn't, they could have been charged. So they adopted. The abuse, in every extreme, went on until I left the home at age 15. I never went back though. They never left me alone until they died in 2002 and 2008 respectively. Other members of that family won't deny it all. It happened. I didn't make things up and had it not occurred, wouldn't be as complicated as I am today at 65. It goes both ways, people. What awful people. Of course you know none of that was your fault. I'm glad you were able to get out even just a couple years sooner than 18. I hope you've been able to make a good life for yourself since and have something or someone you love, or just something good in your life. I had a professor in college have this happen. She and her husband were having trouble getting pregnant and so decided to look into adopting some older kids. They were the perfect couple. Both had good paying, stable jobs, no other kids, willing to take on older kids, etc. They were matched with a set of brothers who had been in the system for a while. They had recently been taken out of a long-term foster home when one of the boys accused the dad of punishing him by putting hot sauce on his lips. It ended up being a lie but the damage was done. My professor didn't know that at the time as the state had only told them they had been taken out BC of abuse. So they adopt the boys who immediately start having major behavior problems. Through therapy they discovered the boys both bad reverse attachment disorder worsened by being taken out of their previous home. Both of the boys, middle school age, were acting out so badly they were frequently suspended and nearing expulsion. Around that time my professor got pregnant. And soon had a baby boy. Then the brothers started trying to abuse the baby so they could never be alone. Not even for 5 minutes. So the parents were constantly monitoring them and they had to sleep under lock and key. It was so bad. My professor and her husband decided to look into moving back to where her parents live in another state but turned out they had been lied to again and the boys were not allowed to move to another state under their adoption agreement. So my professor and her husband were stuck with these 2 boys who hated their adoptive family under extremely difficult and stressful circumstances. I was also so saddened by this story. BC they went into this with pure intentions looking to provide a loving home to children who need one only to have all of that destroyed by lies and freaking sucks. Are parents not allowed to give the kids back up for adoption? It seems disingenuous for birth parents to be allowed to give up children for adoption. but not adoptive parents. I don't know if it was adoption or foster care. But when I was younger, my aunt and uncle were looking after a boy. They didn't have him for long because he ended up chasing my uncle around the house with a knife. PFFT. Child's play. A woman I worked with had been fostering a 13-year-old girl for over 2 years and had started the adoption process. Girl had a history of trouble with her previous fosters, but had been doing very well with them for the whole time they were fostering her. She was seeing a therapist regularly and everything was shaping up to be a clean adoption process. Then she started acting out suddenly, hiding things, blaming my co-worker and her husband for separating her from her brother, saying she deserved to live with her real mom. She started getting in trouble at school, being disrespectful to her teachers and that sort of thing. They had several emergency sessions with her therapist, but the girl shut everyone out. The final straw was when she accused my co-worker's husband of raping her. There was an investigation and she admitted to lying. But obviously they didn't want to risk having someone who would lie like that in the house. It could have ruined her husband's life. The adoption fell through and she went back into the foster care system. Her therapist said that it's fairly common for children who come from unstable homes to freak out at the prospect of stability once they have it, and begin acting out. Sad situation all around, really. Self-sabotaging. So sad. Before adopting me, my parents adopted a baby who they quickly learned was deaf. They didn't feel like they could raise a baby properly, so they worked with the adoption agency to find deaf parents who were thrilled to have her instead. At first I thought it was kind of ducked up that my parents would return a baby, but it really worked out better for everyone in the end. I think that was the responsible thing to do. Kudos to your parents for understanding their limitations and ability. I've told this story a few times, but we adopted a 3-year-old. He had a few behavior issues, which we attributed to trauma and sought appropriate help. He did well for several years, but when he turned 9 he began displaying dangerous behaviors, hurting animals, hoarding things in his room, making suicidal comments, sexually inappropriate. We ramped up the doc visits and therapy, but he was still admitted to the hospital 3 times before he turned 10. When he was 10, we woke up to our house burning down. He thought it was a party. Spent a few years in a facility, till insurance got sick of paying. They told us we could pay $40K a month to keep him there or bring him home. We have other younger children and his therapist agreed it wasn't safe, so we refused to pick him up. And now we have a child abuse for abandonment record. Geez. When a child is clearly a danger to self and others and shows no signs of behavior changes, they need to be somewhere safe for everyone. It's beyond awful that insurance was cut off. Another egregious example of flaws within the system. So sorry for you and your family. This is just a sad story, and only somewhat related. My grandpa's parents had 6 kids before him. He was the 7th, and they didn't want him, so they gave him up for adoption as a baby. He had wonderful, loving parents, in a stable home. He was the only child. Then when he was 5, his parents were in a fatal accident and they both died. My grandpa somehow survived, and instead of being sent to a foster care, he ended up back at his birth parents' house. He went from this amazing, loving home to an abusive one with 6 other children running around. They had no money, so they constantly went hungry. His parents beat him and made sure he knew he wasn't wanted by them. When he was 13, his dad drove him to the Ohio border and told him to get out of the truck. Then he drove off without him. That's ducked up. We adopted twins and the experience destroyed our family. Psych admissions, drug use, school expulsions, threats on our lives, starting fires, involvement with gangs, wrecked cars, etc. I could go on. It's the one thing in my life I wish I could undo. We're not alone. I knew one mother in town who deadbolt locked her bedroom door and slept with a knife under her pillow out of fear of her adoptive daughter. Another family had to send their adopted daughter off for a year of residential treatment. You're definitely not alone. We adopted a child who eventually burned our home down. Feel free to reach out if you need to talk. Actual foster parent here, haven't adopted. I never regret the kids. I completely regret becoming a foster parent. Probably mostly because of the county that I did. It's the bureaucratic bullshit and the courts and workers that don't care about the kids that I can't stand. I've had some really tough kids. And one had to move because we couldn't keep him safe. But I've loved them all regardless of their behaviors. Can you elaborate on this more? It sounds really interesting. Standard, not my story, but my parents' best friends adopted a son from Russia as a 2-year-old. He is the poster child of fetal alcohol syndrome effects. Violent. Learning issues. The shortest temper. The works. His poor, adoptive parents tried everything. They are great parents and had already raised 3. 2 of their own and 1 foster kid. This boy gave them every issue. He was violent and disrespectful towards them. Towards teachers. Toward fellow students. He couldn't be controlled. They cried over him a lot. Legally disowned him at 17 after he stabbed their other kid with a kitchen knife. What the heck? It's pretty common to regret adopting kids from Russia. It's pretty much the only place in the world where adoptable white kids are plentiful, however a lot of them have FARs or other congenital issues and the orphanages turn them into sociopaths. You can Google to read some of the stories. You can even notice the effect of the orphanages on babies. Before you would expect their personalities to begin being affected by that environment. I heard a story about a couple who adopted a baby from Russia. And he never cried. Because in the overcrowded orphanages, the nurses can't respond to babies as soon as they start crying. There are so many babies that they just get to the baby when they get to it. So by the time this baby got to America, he had learned not to cry because to him, there was no connection between communicating he needed something and having that thing provided. His adopted parents just had to guess his needs as best they could. It wasn't me. But my neighbors when I was about 10 years old adopted a girl that was my age. They already had 3 other adopted children and one that was actually their own. This poor girl was 10 years old and they changed her name from something that she went by her whole life. She had a whole slew of issues. But what topped it off was when she started developing a crush on one of her adopted brothers. The mother and the son caught the adopted daughter watching him sleep multiple times. And there was a few times where she would hold him down and tickle him inappropriately. He was only 8 years old. I think the cherry on the cake was when the mom found a journal the girl had been keeping saying how much she was in love with that little boy and things she wanted to do to him. They sent her back to her foster home after only a few months of her living with them. In my school district there's a family with something like 11 kids. All adopted out of the foster care system. When I first learned about them, I thought it was kind of creepy that when they are adopted into the family, they have their first names legally charged to a name that starts with the letter N, along with taking the family's last name of course. It came across as very Duggar, if you know what I mean. Then the mom explained that all of these kids were rescued out of horrifically abusive homes and nightmare childhoods. And the name change represented a fresh start in a safe, stable, permanent home. In the set of 3 biological siblings they adopted most recently, ages 7-11. But the kids' behavior improved drastically once the adoption and name change was finalized. Because they started to understand that their bio parents couldn't get to them anymore. One of them already had a name starting with N but he insisted on changing it anyway to be part of the family tradition. For his sister, who has a severe speech disorder, it made her life much easier to go by Nina instead of Jocelyn. It's astonishing how much progress they've made in the 2 years since they moved here. My ex was adopted and I got the feeling his parents regretted it. They struggled financially and moved around a lot. He was very entitled and immature. Not a cute scene. An old friend and her husband adopted a child from Korea. The orphanage told them she was healthy and her mom was just too poor to take care of her. They had already adopted a kid from Korea and that girl is a good kid. Bright and fun. So they didn't worry too much. Turns out they lied to them. That girl had a lot of physical and mental problems. She has severe mental delays and needs 24 hours care. She throws huge tantrums and hits everyone around. Doctors think her biological mother was probably on drugs when she had her. She caused them so much stress that it broke their marriage. They couldn't agree about what to do with her. None of them wants full custody and their older daughter doesn't want to live with her. She's tired of getting hit for no reason. Last time I heard from her they were looking for permanent placement in a private inpatient care facility. Ducking like and subscribe.